I need to take a big, deep breath. Let's start this with a...
I'm in trouble. Mary's right there.
Uh-oh. Let's start with a little silence. Kind of get recentered to that big meal. So, wow, that's loud. Is it loud, Glenn? Seems like it is. So, we're back. Before lunch, we talked about the third step, and we took the third step prayer. And in the third step prayer, to the best of our ability, we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to God as we understood Him. So what do we do with that now? If we're truly with the Spirit, then we should be open to be able to get a look now at what blocks us from Him. And that's where the fourth step comes in. I talk a lot about the fourth step. It's my little pet thing to talk about how I think how overblown it is. I alluded to it a little the other night. I've watched, in the time I've been doing this, probably literally hundreds of fourth steps. And, those of you that have been through it, probably most of you, make this mountain out of a molehill, as my father used to say. Don't make a mountain out of a molehill. And, and I think if you talk to somebody that's been through it, what they'll tell you is that on the other end, it's really no big deal. So, why is that? Why is it that it seems such a daunting task to look at our character defects? And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit over the next 40 or 50 minutes or so. Our character defects. So, it says in the book that we take inventory just like a business would take inventory. If a business doesn't take regular inventory, it goes broke. And then it says we went back over our lives thoroughly, and we had a look at what blocks us from the Spirit. So it doesn't say, that we're going to take an immoral inventory. When Gene and I were, right after we did this, Jerry threw us out and he said, you need to go be of service somewhere, find your own gig. This is my gig. And so we had gone to Longwood, which was a treatment correctional facility in Jamaica Plain, right across from the VA hospital in Boston. And we had gone there, probably in mid-August of that year. We were up to September, and so Gene and I started to do this at Longwood. And just as a little side story, so some of you heard this, but I ended up, I went to the CO, the guard that's in charge, and I said, we were here and we did a commitment last month, and we really enjoyed it. And he said, yeah, we thought it went really well. And I said, what if we were to come in and if you could give us a few of your inmates and we could work with them one-on-one? And he goes, oh no, I don't think you could do that. He goes, when they do the fourth step here, they get all crazy. So I begged him. I said, geez, come on, can just give us a couple guys. And he said, well, let me think about it. And so I went back in 2 weeks and begged him some more and said, will you give us? He said, all right, I'll give you 2 guys, and we'll see how it goes. But if it gets unruly or it gets ornery or hairy or anything, that's it. It'll be done. So Gene and I started with 2 guys, and in a year we had the entire prison population, which was 78, and we didn't have any unruliness. We didn't actually do the work. very similar to what we're doing here. We're not actually doing the work here. The word big book workshop might be a little bit of a misnomer. I guess it is. Dana always says that our meeting Thursday night is the greatest fellowship meeting in the world, because it's a bunch of drunks that come together and get to see this. What I think of our meetings are a funnel that basically dumps people in the top, swirls them around, gets them immersed in this thing, and then if we're lucky, some fall out the bottom and they're ready to go do work one-on-one with each other. That's really what the meeting is. It's like a funnel. So we're at Longwood, and we get to the inventory, and this woman way down in the back, like where Kelly is, raises her hand, and she says to me, when are we going to get to the deep, dark secrets? There aren't any deep, dark secrets. If you do this long enough, what you begin to see is patterns in people's behaviors. And what you begin to see is that we're all alike. We're all alike. I've never heard an inventory that shocked me. I mean, it really all gets down to the same behavior. The traditional AA says we can't work with women. I've worked with as many women as men. I don't think it's a big deal. People say, well, they have women's issues. Not really. They have alcoholic issues. It's pretty much the same thing. This works with Al-Anons too. I had just to defy the whole principle of not working with women and not working with Al-Anons. The first person I ever worked with was Lisa. Lisa was the most beautiful 29-year-old Al-Anon that was just as sick as could be. And her and I went through the work together. I had to call Jerry up and ask him if that was okay. And he said, well, what's your intention? And I said, well, she wants to go through the work. And he said, okay. So we can do that. It's a lot of I don't know, in my opinion, maybe bad information that can go on out there. If we're on a spiritual path and we're going in the right direction, none of that really matters. As long as the people that we're working with are comfortable with us. That's really the main thing. Can they be comfortable with us? So we're not trying to dispel deep, dark secrets, and we're not doing an immoral inventory. It says in the book we do a moral inventory. So what's the difference? What's the word moral? If you think about, if you look at the doctor's opinion, they talk about moral psychology. Dr. Silkworth talks about it in the doctor's opinion. He says we need some kind of moral psychology. And what I learned from Jerry was moral psychology means that basically instead of being healed from the outside in, we get healed from the inside out. So Chuck C. used to talk about it being an inside job. I could never understand that. He'd say, this is an inside job. What does that mean? We're going to rob a bank or something? It's an inside job. Means basically that it's a moral inventory. Means we're going to do it from the inside out. What's it say there, Mary?
Second, Mary.
Ethical, relating to principles of right and wrong in behavior, conforming to a standard of what is right and good.
Interesting. That's the definition from the Little Big Book Dictionary in 1939.
Morals, ethics, rules, or habits of conduct, especially sexual conduct with reference to standards of right or wrong.
Okay.
So what are we really trying to do here? What we're trying to do is we're trying to see some patterns in our behavior. That's what the inventory is really about. It's not about what happened. I had somebody one time tell me that they had raped a girl. This is how deluded we get. I raped a girl. We get down to the inventory, and as he came down through the thing, I says, "What happened?" So he tells me. He says, "Well, I was 6 years old, and Susie was out in the woods, and we all took our clothes off. and I laid on top of her. That was the rape. See, we can delude ourselves in our alcoholic mind and blow things up to the point where they're bigger than they actually are. You can take that little example and plug it into anything in your own experience and find out that we start out down here with something, and all of a sudden we're way up here with it. We can grow it and make it bigger than life. I'll tell you another one. This guy told me from the very get-go that he was abused as a child. Now, we're talking growing up here in the 50s and 60s. Some of you have heard this story. So we got down to the inventory. He's reading his fifth step, and he says to me, I said, so tell me about the child abuse. So he said, well, here it is. So he said, it was Christmas Day, sometime in the 60s. And he said, we came from a big family, and he said, my mother asked me to go out and get a platter out in the garage. And there was some shelves above the car where the car was parked. And that day she had got a brand new Mercedes as a Christmas present. So my friend went out, and he couldn't reach the platter. And so he climbed up on the hood of the car. And his mother came out and saw him and gave him a slap. That was his child abuse. So you can begin to see, if you've never done inventory before, or even if you have, the way this thing looks is again, we can make things bigger than life in our own mind. So what are we really trying to do? And that may happen in your inventory if you haven't done it yet. Maybe not as drastic as that, but usually we learn some truths about ourselves. But we're trying to see patterns in our behavior. So it says in the directions, it says we go back through our lives. Nothing counts but honesty. And I'm paraphrasing. It gives us 3 columns. And there's 3 different inventories. So we're talking about this resentment inventory right now. And it talks about looking at people, institutions, or principles. So let's look at those one at a time. People, pretty easy. I'm resentful at so-and-so. And then in the second column, it shows us the cause. So the cause, whatever it is, we write it down. Very simple, very straight to the point. Then in the third column, it talks about what it affects. So this is our part of the story. What is it? How did this affect me, this resentment that I have? What happened to cause a resentment, and how did it affect me? And on the 2 pages where the 3 columns are, Bill gives us very direct things to look at. Was it my pride? Was it my financial security? Was it my personal security? Was it my drawing a blank? Ambitions. Thank you, Mary. And sexual relations. So we get those down on paper. We get a look at them. If you want, we can write a little sentence or 2 next to them, just to remind us of what they are. And that's it for the 3rd column. Now we go back and we look at our part. So some people like to call this the turnaround, or the 4th column. So in the 4th column, we turn this thing around. And we look at our behavior. And this is where the real departure is for most of us. Because it's the first time in our life that we really get a look at where we were at fault. Even if the other person was to blame, what did we do to cause the situation? So I talked this morning about my nemesis. Her name was Barbara. And all through my career, this woman and I kept locking horns. And so I literally probably have tens of pieces of paper, not hundreds, but it's right up there. Quite a bit of inventory. I had to keep looking at this over and over and over again. And finally, I began to see patterns in my behavior. What I began to see in this case was that when I wanted something, I would go and ask for it, just like the actor that I read this morning, and I'd ask her, and I'd be real nice. And then when it didn't fit my little plan or my little design, I'd turn up the heat a little bit. And I'd ask another way. And she could see right through the whole thing. She could see that I was a fake. I was a fake, and I was a liar, and I was a cheat. It seems severe, but that's what I was. And so, over time, she got used to that behavior. And I'm sure she said to herself, here he comes, let me brace myself. And she started acting out back at me. And then, all of a sudden, we're in this constant battle. And, all I really wanted for her was to like me and like my little plan. And when that didn't happen, I got pissed off. So we get to look at that in the fourth column. Like I said with her, I got to look at it quite a bit. Ultimately, she was my demise. At least it would seem so on the surface. So we went through about 13 years together, and we were peers for probably the last 10 of it. They hired me to fix an operation in the dealership. And I went up there. It took me about 5 years to get a handle on it. I got it fixed, and I got it running pretty well. And we got some awards from Herman Miller, which was the furniture that we represented and whatnot. And I got great reviews. I reported to the owners of the company, and they, I always got a good raise, got good bonuses. Everything was going along great. And then in 2007, in January, I had a good review, and in February they called me in the office and they said, "Dick, we were having a little problem with your work ethic." I said, "Really? I don't know what the problem could be. I'm giving you the numbers that you want. I'm giving you what you need. The operation is running within budget. It's the people are happy up there. Well, we don't think you work hard enough." And I was dumbfounded. I said, I'm there at 6:45 every morning, and I leave at 5 o'clock. They couldn't really put their finger on it. So some more time goes by, and they call me back. Now we're in April, and they said, we're really not happy with the way things are going, and we're going to have you report to Barbara. Now, I was reporting to the president of the company. Barbara was the senior vice president, I was the vice president. Not that any of that matters. Just the whole thing seemed pretty peculiar to me. So we had a meeting, and I decided I had to walk out. I was so upset. I said, I don't know whether I can weather this thing. I don't know whether I can stay. And so over the weekend, I said, you know what? I made up my mind. I'm gonna be positive about this. I'm going to try to turn it around. I'm going to try to give them what they want. So that's what I did. I went back with that mindset. This story is leading somewhere, believe it or not. So I went back and I sat down with her, and she said, "This is what we need to do, and we're going to have goals and objectives." And I said, "Okay, I'll wait for them." And so I never got any goals and objectives. And June went by, and July went by, and sometime in early July, Deb was coming to pick me up to go up to New Hampshire, and I said to her, she was there at the office, I said, "So, look, how about checking in about how I'm doing?" And she goes, "Okay." She goes, "Why don't we give it, I'll check in with you next Friday." So next Friday rolled around, and Deb was waiting out there for me, and I said, "So, I want to revisit, how am I doing, And she said, "Well, I don't think you're doing very good, Dick." Not at all. She said, "What I think is that you haven't done good at all." And I said, "Well, tell me where I'm not doing well." And she said, "Well, you're just not doing a good job." And I said, "Well, where are the goals and objectives that you promised me back in April?" And she said, "You're a vice president. You figure it out." So I went out and I got in the car and I said to Debbie, this is it. In August, I went away to Seattle to see my son, and he was working a job in the mortgage industry. He got fired on Monday. I flew back on Wednesday. I went in on Thursday, and on Friday, I looked out the window, and all three owners were walking up the parking lot. And I said, "This is it." So they came in, and one of the partners started crying. And they said, "Dick, this just isn't working out, and we got to let you go. If you want to stay and be a salesman, you can, but or you can take some severance." And I said, "I'll take some severance." And they said, "Well, we really think that you ought to stay with us and try to make it work." And I said, "Boys, it's over, And we all hugged, and I walked out. and I was a free man. So now, back to the inventory. I go home, and I sit there, and I start thinking about how I was wronged by Barbara. What happened to me? And I'm thinking to myself, this just is wrong. It's just wrong. I sat there for 2 weeks and I stared at the wall, and I ground that scenario over and over and over again in my mind. And at the end of the 2 weeks, I was in no better place than at the beginning of the 2 weeks. Now, I've been doing this a while, but it still proves to me that I can't think my way out of a problem. I can't do it. I can't do it. So I knew what I had to do. It took me 2 weeks to get there. We don't get there very easily. I called up Jerry and made my appointment, like I do, and I sat down and wrote the inventory. You know what I found? I had to look at my part in the whole thing. See, Barbara went to the owners and said, look, I can do my job and I can do Dick's job. And we can fire this other vice sales VP, and between the two of them, we can save a lot of money. And of course the business people, they're business owners. I don't blame them for what happened. They made a business decision about me. I really didn't have the resentment at them. I had the resentment at Barbara. Here's what I found. We'd had this thing going on for almost 14 years, over and over and over again. And we had pretty much made peace with the whole thing. But here's what happened. See, I would go to board meetings, and I'd sit down, and they'd say to me, okay, I was up in Woburn. Corporate was in Boston, and they'd say to me, okay, you know what, we think we want to change the delivery program. That's my baby they're fooling around with. We had it running like a top. We think we can do it better. We think it ought to be handled all out of one place. And I'd sit there, and I'd do the slow boil. And then finally what would happen is I'd explode, and I'd say, you take your delivery program, and I can't repeat what I said to them. And there's 6 people there, and their jaws are dropped, and I'm acting bad again. So what happens in all this is I discover that I begin to shut down, and I don't go to those meetings anymore. I start making excuses up about why I can't be there. I'm in Woburn, and I start to build this island. And the island gets bigger and bigger. And pretty soon I'm not connected to my peers in Boston. We talk about being on the outside. This is what I'm starting to see in the 4th column. And I'm starting to see that the reason that I did that is because of fear. Because I'm afraid that I'm going to lose it, or I'm going to blow up, or I'm afraid they're not going to like me. So I start to pull away. And pretty soon I'm not a part of anything anymore. And that allows them to begin to make decisions about me that I'm not included with. And that's free. That's freeing to me. It isn't freeing to me when I write it, but it's freeing to me after I write it, and I find it objectionable, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And I say, you know what, God, I can't do this deal the way I'm doing it. It didn't work. It didn't work. I wasn't a good executive, and this is why. What Barbara did wasn't right, but what I did wasn't right either. I caused my own firing indirectly. So the good part of the story is that Barbara and I today are friends. We're friends. That's hard to believe, isn't it? You'd say, what are you, nuts? We're friends because God allowed me the ultimate act of forgiveness. And I really know what true forgiveness is, because I don't feel any animosity towards her at all. And I was able to go on and start my own business. And that's what God had in mind in the first place, to put me somewhere where I could be more available and of more service. And 3 months after they fired me, I was back in the boardroom in front of their sales force presenting Legacy Office Solutions, my company. They're my biggest client today. And that's a story about how the 4th step can work all the way through in one complete circle. See, we want to see the defect, and then we want to be able to understand it and then turn it around. But in doing that, we don't solve the problem. So the 4th step isn't about that. The 4th step is just about seeing the pattern in our behavior. Then God can do the rest. We're going to talk about that a little later on. So that's what the 4 steps for. Malcolm will talk about the other 2 inventories.
God is everything or He is nothing. We ended talking about surrender, and we ended talking about the solution, putting my life into the care of God's hands. We talked about surrender. We talked about belief. We talked about faith. We talked about engagement. So we're all done. No problem. All I need to do is make a decision to believe and begin to engage and to ask God for His guidance and put my life in His hands. It's one small problem. And it stands between both of my ears. My thinking won't allow me to live in the solution. My thinking forces me to live in the problem. My thinking is obsessive by nature and compulsive. And my thinking goes to Barbara and dwells upon Barbara. And my thinking goes to the problem and lives in the problem. It won't live in the solution. And no matter how many times I get on my knees and I ask God to direct my thinking so that I can live in the solution, 15 minutes later I'm angry and I'm resentful and I have had enough of you. And the solution's gone. Gone. Even though I may have felt a great effect in making that surrender and in making that decision and in asking God into my life. So if I can't live in the solution, I'm cooked. I'm all done. And I don't have the power to change my thinking. Okay? Who's going to change my thinking? Well, God could and would if I could ask Him, if I knew what to ask Him. But I don't know what to ask Him. All I know today and at this moment that I've made my surrender is that I'm angry, I'm resentful, I'm obsessive, I get caught up in my own shit. It looks ugly. And I can really get caught up in it. As Dick was talking about, taking 2 weeks and 13 years to talk about Barbara. I had a resentment, which I'll talk about a little bit later on, that went on my whole life up until probably 6-7 years ago. And this is 10 years after I did my inventory, 10 years after I became recovered, and I'm still resentful at somebody. And I'll talk about it in a minute. We cannot fool ourselves about values. What are values? Values are what is important to me. Values are what is important to me. What drives me? What makes my decisions? What do I have the fire in the belly about? And in turn, what do I get angry about? And what do I get afraid of? My children, the success of my children. Sure. My job. How I make my money. What else? What you think of me. Okay? What I've got, what I don't have. How much is in my retirement fund? Whether I have the 4-bedroom house and the 2 cars in the driveway and the white picket fence. Whether I wear that nice leather Harley jacket. And whether I have the Harley. Yeah. And what happens when one of my values and one of the things that are important to me is threatened? I get angry. or I'm afraid. I'm afraid that you're going to take it away from me. I'm afraid that Barbara's going to make me look bad to the owners. I'm afraid that I'm not going to measure up. I'm afraid that you're going to take my money. I'm afraid that I'm not going to get the girl. I'm afraid that the girl's not going to let me get the other girl. More is better. Of course, I'm not about to let you get the other guy. So what's the vehicle that I have if I don't have the power to change? What is going to become my vehicle to change? My vehicle for change will be my inventory work. So what does that look like? You know, Dick shared an awful lot about what it looked like for him in the particular case of Barbara and inventory. But here I am, and I'm surrendered, and I'm reading the book, and it's January of 1994. And you know, Jerry and Dick and Dana and Gene try to make light of inventory work as best they can. And in a year or two before, in an AWOL that I had gone through, somebody had given me this Hazelton inventory of 223 questions, which in reality wasn't even the inventory. The truth of the matter is the 223 questions were to allow you to find out the truth about yourself so you could write it down on your inventory. And the 223 questions were all mental health related, and you know, all what happened to you when you were 1.5 years old. Then we went through the 1 to 2 year old age and so on and so forth. And this kind of inventory work had created the illusion that, as Dick talked about, that this inventory was this Mount Everest. And here's Dick and Jerry and Dana and Gene telling me that it's no big deal. It's no big deal. And I've just come off of all this medication that we talk about, and I've just lost my job, and my house is just burned down, and I'm supposed to write inventory, and the best I can do is I can get out of bed in the morning, and I can go to work, and I can get through the day, and I can sit down in front of the television and fall into bed. So inventory came very, very hard. The work, to work on it for 15 minutes was a huge effort. It was a huge effort. The one thing we don't talk about too much is when I'm in my head and we have all this resentment and anger in my head, it consumes me. It consumes me physically as well as mentally. I don't have any energy. I don't have any strength. Everything is dark and everything is colored with the anger, with the depression, with the anxiety that comes along with it. And everything is colored in shades of gray and black. There is no sunshine. There is no bright colors. And I'm struggling to muster a little bit of energy to do something. And I'm saying I'll work on this then, and I'll work on this now, and I'm never getting to it. And finally, I get some names on a piece of paper. I get begin to get some inventory written, and I write that column and write that list of names of people that I'm resentful towards. And like a good alcoholic, I think it's everybody that I ever knew. And I'm thoroughly convinced that I have to write the fourth step. The fourth step. This isn't about a fourth step, or it isn't about mine. This is some sort of piece of artwork. And the more my head is working around this, it's got to be this monumental Homer's Iliad. The more I can't do it. So I do get a list of names going. I do get a list of causes of what it is that you did to me to cause me to be so angry. And I did manage to get down what was affected. I'm really not entirely sure I understood what it meant to have my ambitions affected, to have my sex relations affected, to have my security affected, my pride, my self-esteem. I'm not sure I really entirely understood that, but I put words down on the paper that I thought kind of fit. That would kind of look good on my thesis here. And that was about as far as I gotten. It's April of 1994, and the poor kids in Spectrum are waiting for me to get a little further along in the book. And of course, I'm telling them all how to do this, and I haven't done it. Oh, grandiosity. We get ourselves in some of the most incredible situations. And I think Dana and Ben thought I knew what I was talking about. Anyway, I finally decided that, listen, I got to make an appointment. So I make an appointment for Jerry to listen to my fifth step. I make an appointment for sometime in May. And I say to myself, well, gee, this is going to get this thing done. This is going to get this thing done. And of course, it doesn't get the thing done. And we're coming up on the appointment in May. And I managed to get the inventory out, and I don't know whether it was the day before the appointment, but it was probably pretty close. And I managed to get some kind of fourth column written. And I'm just trying to get this thing done. I'm just trying to survive. And the upshot of the story, and I'll go on to talk about the rest of the inventory work, is it worked anyway. It worked anyway. It's at the bottom of page 65. It makes the comment, we completed this and we considered it carefully. And it's talking about a body of work that consists of the first column, the second column, and the third column of our inventory. There are people in the room who do their inventory horizontally. They'll take a name and a resentment and a cause, and they'll write out the fourth column and go on to the next one. The book actually encourages us to write it in terms of write all the names, write all the causes and conditions, write all the effects might, and then stop and consider it carefully and go on to pages 66 and 67. And my experience was all of these resentments, with a few minor exceptions, fell off. They were gone, just having written the first, second, and third column. And to understand the purpose of this for me was to be rid of these resentments, to be rid of what clutters my mind. I obviously had to go on and write about the fourth column and to answer the questions, where was I selfish, self-centered? How was I dishonest? What was I afraid of? If I could identify a mistake, write down the mistake that I could identify, and why was I to blame? And that goes on, and that occurs in the middle of page 67. And I had to go on and do that writing. And much later in my recovery, I went on and looked back at it and did more of it and did a better job. But as I said, it worked anyway. It worked anyway, because this is a God thing. I can't do this. No matter how technically proficient I become at inventory work, I'm not going to get rid of those resentments. If I write them down on a piece of paper and I follow instructions, God will take them away. God will take them away. I will realize the futility and the fatality of them. I will begin to recognize when I'm living in them, when I'm obsessed with them. And the book has given me a set of instructions about how to be rid of them. How to be rid of them. And once again, God takes them away. And God does this for me. There may be a few that remain. As I said, there's 95% of our inventory work that are resentments that fall away in this process. That just fall away. And that was my experience, and it may be some of your experiences. But there are always, it seems, a few resentments that continue to follow us. Oftentimes they're the ones in our face, the barbers of the world. And in my case, it was my mother. My mother was the Al-Anon, the elephant in the room when I was young, that we talked about the other day. And my mother was the woman that pushed the buttons of my father all of my life. And I would watch my father begin to explode when she pushed his buttons. And I grew up with this day in, day out. And as I mentioned the other day, at 13 or 14 years old, I was gone. I didn't have anything to do with this anymore. I came and went from the house, grew up, and later on in life came and went and came back from time to time. But I was done. And by the time I was 25, in the middle of my active alcoholism, this woman made me so goddamn fucking mad, I can't tell you. And forgive me for being colorful, but it describes how I felt. And I'm sure that many of you can relate. And I would get angry at her just to be in her presence. She didn't need to say anything. And, of course she's on my inventory work. And of course the resentment doesn't go away. And of course I write all about it. And all these things that she did to me to cause me to be so very angry. And I get down to why I'm responsible for the fact that I'm angry, and why it's selfish, and why I'm dishonest, and why I'm fearful. And the resentment just doesn't go away. And I go on to continue to do this work and to continue to be involved in Alcoholics Anonymous and be involved in sharing this message and reading this book with people. And years pass. And early on in the first 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, maybe even 10 years I did this, when we would reach this point in our workshops on Wednesday night, I would get out a blackboard and I would put some inventory on the blackboard. And perpetually my mother would wind up on the blackboard. She was the example of resentment that I was going to use, and the example of writing out inventory that I was going to use. And I would share this with you guys as a group, and the resentment wouldn't go away. And I would pay it lip service and all that. And I came to find out maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago that I never identified what it was that made me so very angry. And here it is, she's in the rest home. She's got Alzheimer's. And it occurs to me one day that she never let me finish a sentence. Since I was a child. She never let me finish a sentence. So I fortunately I don't think we have a fire here. But he's getting the fire truck out. So I came to realize one day that she never let me finish a sentence. So I would be angry the minute I saw her and tried to communicate with her because I could never finish the sentence. And immediately the resentment was gone. Just like that. I didn't need to do any more inventory, so I knew what it was finally that caused me to be so very angry. And God took the resentment away on the spot. On the spot. So in this particular case, I had written inventory about all the wrong things for all these years. I hadn't identified what it was that made me so very angry. And in turn, obviously couldn't figure out what my part of it was. And my part of it was very simple when I figured out what it was that caused me to be very angry. My part of it was very simple because I wasn't important enough to listen to. So it was real simple. It's not very complicated. But I got to tell you, I spent 35 or 40 years in this. 35 or 40 years in this. Let me change gears here a little bit. I talk a little bit about sense of well-being. And those of you who are close to me know that in this past year, I've faced some great challenges. A year ago in October, I lost my best friend. Kathy lost her husband. And I closed my business a year ago in December. And as the year has progressed, I've been unemployed, went to work. The job was too important to me, and became too full of fear, so I managed to lose it. And I'm unemployed again. And my wife has decided to move on down the highway, so we're going to sell the house. So the question of what do I need to be okay has really come to the forefront. And I've really tested, God is testing what it is that I say. And what it is I say is that all I need to be okay is my 12 by 12 smock room, my 12-inch black and white TV so I can watch my Red Sox, my big book, and my AA friends. That's all I truly need to be okay. And if I can get life down to that smallest common denominator, that's all I need, then nothing I have can be threatened. You can take away your love. You can take away the house, the car. The kids cannot like me anymore. The wife can go on down the highway. The business can go south. And am I going to be okay? Do I trust God enough that I know that God will give me everything that I need? Am I truly willing to put my life in God's hands? Am I truly willing to know that everything's going to be okay? So once again, I can't fool myself about values. Is the house going to do anything for my spiritual well-being? The car? The wife? What do I need other than you guys? Other than you guys and my big book? So I can't fool myself about values. So in this process, as God takes away my resentments, and we're going to talk about fears in a minute, I get down to the point where that sine wave that Dick talks about, I can't get very excited. I'm not going to get very excited when you're angry at me. I'm not going to get very excited when you take my money. I'm not going to get very excited when I lose things. I'm not going to get very excited when you don't like me. Because it doesn't affect my relationship with God. It doesn't affect my spiritual growth. It doesn't affect the sense of well-being that I have in my life. The sense of the fact that I'm going to be okay. That I'm going to be okay. That I have everything I need. So I'm going to give this to Dick to talk a little bit about the second part of the inventory, since he punted it to me to talk about the second part of the inventory.
You're giving it back, huh? So, in the book, right after the fourth column, it asks the question now about fear. And, last night I talked a great deal about the incredible anxiety and depression that I had, throughout my drinking years and into early sobriety, and I know today that was all based on irrational fear. The alcoholic mind at work. I see it, very clearly now. So the fear inventory really isn't very complex. If we read it and open the book up and look at it, basically it just asks us a couple questions. I'm going to read it. It says, we reviewed our fears thoroughly. This is the directions. We reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper, even though we had no resentment in connection with them. So in the first inventory, in the resentment inventory, we look at fear. It's bracketed. It's next to self-esteem. But in this inventory, we're looking at just regular fears. So if I use Barbara as the example, in the resentment inventory, I had fears there. But that isn't what this inventory is about. And I asked myself, okay, what do I have fears? Don used to tell a great story about the fear inventory. He said he had a guy one time he was working with, and the guy said, he said to the guy, okay, well, let's talk about your fears. And the guy goes, I don't have any fears. And he goes, really? You don't have any fears? He goes, you afraid of snakes? And the guy said, nope. And he said, are you afraid of the dark? The guy said, nope. And he said, what if we put the snake in the closet and you were in the dark? Are you afraid of that? Yeah, I'm afraid of that. We're all afraid of something. You know, I talk about Gene. You know, Gene got into his sobriety a little bit, and he got all of a sudden developed this incredible fear of height. He worked in power plants. He'd be up walking in the, you know, in the machinery and whatnot, or driving over a bridge. And he couldn't. It came out of nowhere. This is after he did the work, and so he had to get a look at it. And you know, he did through the fear inventory. Fear inventory almost looks so simple. Again, we could tell ourselves, you know, this can't work. This is, you know, I'm way more complicated than this. And this is too simple. You know, it's only, what is it? It's all of 3 paragraphs. What I've learned in this whole thing is when there's few paragraphs, it probably has nothing to do with me. It has more to do with God. And that's exactly what's contained in the fear inventory. So I'll read it. It says, we reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper, even though we had no resentment in connection with them. Here's the second piece. We asked ourselves why we had them. So what's my fear and why do I have it? Then the question, wasn't it because self-reliance failed me? Was it or wasn't it? Okay? And then it goes on and it says some of us rather, it said self-reliance was as good as far as it went, but it didn't go far enough. Some of us once had great self-confidence, but it didn't fully solve the fear problem or any other. When it made us cocky, it was worse. You ever hear people talk about having great self-confidence? You know, remember the lack of proportion we talked about? What would an alcoholic look like with great self-confidence? You know, probably, you know, an inferiority complex with an egomaniac mind. Yeah, you know. So we can't, you know, I look at this thing today, in fact, I don't try to get self-confidence. I don't even think about it because the word self is in self-confidence. And if self is the problem, which is what we learned a little bit ago, then why would I want to spend 5 minutes or 5 seconds trying to get up my self-confidence? It's almost taken off the table. This is going to sound great on the tape. So we can't have this self-confidence. And then it says when it didn't fully solve the fear problem or any other, when it made it cocky, it was worse. So that's that ego in play. Then it goes on to say, perhaps there's a better way. We think so, for we're now on a different basis, the basis of trusting and relying upon God. We trust an infinite God rather than our finite self. We're rather in the world to play the role He assigns, just to the extent that we do as we would think He would have us and humbly rely on Him. Does He enable us to match calamity with serenity? We never apologize for anyone for depending upon our Creator. We can laugh at those who think that spirituality is the way of weakness. Paradoxically, it's the way of strength. The verdict of the ages is that faith means courage. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God. We never apologize for God. Instead, we let Him demonstrate through us what He can do. Here's the key. We ask, whenever we see that, it's a prayer. We ask Him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what He would have us be. So we ask Him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what He would have us be. And then it says, at once, we commence to outgrow fear. There's the promise. So that's the fear inventory. The fear inventory basically is, what do we have for fear? Why do we have it? We ask ourselves that self-reliance question, and then we ask God to remove it and direct our attention to what He would have us be. What does He want us to be? He wants us to be of service. If we're in a disease of self, which is what this says, then basically let me direct my attention somewhere else. Fear will be removed. So it was with me. Like I told you last night, that depression and anxiety went away. So that's the fear inventory. Any questions on that? Okay. Okay. You want to do the sex inventory?
My experience was the same as Dick's in that when I asked God to remove fear, He commenced to take away fear immediately. Immediately. In my case, I needed, fear was such an overwhelming issue and a factor that I needed to ask God to take away this overwhelming sense of doom. This overwhelming sense of doom. And I see a couple of heads going up and down. So we live with that overwhelming sense of doom. Please, God, take away that sense of doom. Please, God, take away this overwhelming fear. Please take away this fear of everything and everybody. And I started to get a little bit of relief. A little bit of relief. And then maybe I could identify a couple of fears. Because fears are all about me. You know, that's it. Fears are about nothing but self and self-centeredness. They're just about me and what I'm afraid of losing. What I'm afraid of not getting. That's all. Not very complicated stuff. I'm afraid I'm going to look bad. I'm afraid that you're not going to like me. I'm afraid Nicole's freezing. So as we look through these fears, it's pretty easy. We've just finished a resentment inventory, and we've just finished a fourth column where we've asked ourselves, where was I selfish? Where was I self-centered? Where was I dishonest? You know, what was my mistake? What was I afraid of with respect to the resentments? So we're primed and we're ready to ask ourselves, God, please take away these fears. And we commence to outgrow them. And the book talks about outgrowing them at several places. Right before the third step, it talks about commencing to outgrow fear. And our fears fall from us as the nearness of the Creator, as we become closer to Him. So, once again, it's a God thing. It's entirely a God thing. That if I ask, He will. If I ask, He will. What we forget, though, and what we really tend to forget as we move along in our recovery, is that what I did with those fears is I took them and I set them down beside me. And I carried them with me. And as things happen in life, and as values and things become more and more important again, I pick the fears back up. I pick the fears back up. And I put them on like that wonderful old set of moccasins that fits so well and that is so comfortable. So my default mode is to be afraid of what you think of me. To be afraid I'm not going to get that job. To be afraid I'm going to lose it. To be afraid I don't have enough money, even if I have hundreds of thousands of dollars in the bank. To be afraid that God wouldn't take care of me. That is my default mode. So in asking in my prayers, I ask God for the constant vigilance with respect to fear. And when I feel fear and I begin to feel these things creep up on me, I need to at once ask God for an awareness of His presence and to direct my thinking to what He would have me be. And to give me an alcoholic to talk to. Because I'm only okay when I'm talking to you. I'm only 100% okay when I'm involved in helping somebody else. When I'm sharing the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because then I can't get lost in my own head. And it's not about me. It's about what I'm sharing with you. Or what I'm sharing with you. And I know that God's present when I'm with you, when I'm talking with you. And my thoughts are about you and your recovery. I want to talk about sex? I can go ahead and talk about sex.
I've got more experience in it.
Oh, I should be beat red about now. That's the payback for the FX35 and the running out of gas. God, give me a little help here. When I reached this point in my inventory work, what this looked like was Mount Everest. There wasn't any chance that I was going to do some sex inventory before I did a fifth step and before I moved on down the highway. I was so broken, and I had such a difficult time getting my resentment inventory done and getting my fifth step done that this just wasn't going to happen. And you know what? It was okay. It was okay. I was married. I was involved in a relationship. My third wife was sober. She had been sober a couple of years by then. And the wreckage of alcoholism wasn't too bad. The wreckage of fear and anger and resentment was definitely there. And I'm doing this work in 1995, and the world's falling apart, and I'm going bankrupt, and I'm going through job after job after job. But sex wasn't a huge issue. Sex wasn't a huge issue. In going on and doing workshops and sharing my experience with people and writing more inventory, I needed to write some inventory. And I really needed to ask God for an awful lot of guidance here. Because if I knew you, I messed with you. If I had sex with you, I used you. In one manner, way, shape, or manner. So, my sex inventory wound up being every person I ever had sex with. And I'm not sure that was the purpose of the inventory. I learned later on, and I learned in working with others and sharing this inventory work with others, that the truth about this is it's to shape a safe, sane ideal about my future sex conduct. To shape a safe, sane ideal about my future sex conduct. And it in turn winds up helping to formulate a list of amends, but we'll talk about that later on. And we'll talk about the wisdom of making amends to sexual partners. It may not be the wisest thing in the world to reopen old wounds and go back and revisit relationships that were destined for failure to start with. But that's another discussion. I asked myself, where was I selfish and self-centered? And the list of questions on page 69 is right here. I can't remember every question. Fortunately, you guys are patient. We reviewed our own conduct over the years past. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? Whom had we hurt? Did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Where were we at fault, and what should we have done instead? We got this all down on paper and looked at it. In this way, we tried to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. We subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? We asked God to mold our ideals and help us to live up to them. We remembered always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised and loathed. Bill and Dr. Bob and God gave us a little caveat here in the last paragraph. Whatever our ideal turns out to be, we must be willing to grow toward it. We must be willing to make amends where we have done harm, provided that we do not bring about still more harm in so doing. In other words, we treat sex as we would any other problem. In meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. And the right answer will come if we want it. The right answer will come if we want it. I'm going to give Dick the microphone here.
All right. When I had a little different experience than Malcolm, although a couple of us had the experience that he described, not doing the sex inventory right away. I like the sex inventory because it's really a continuation of a part of the resentment inventory. You know, it really gets us to look at it's really about just looking at our behavior. And as Malcolm said, you know, that was a Don Pritz quote. If we met him, we messed with him. You know, and that was true for me too. You know, my sex background is not that extensive. I was more of a legend in my own mind. I always joke. My wife is shaking her head right now. Too much information, right, Deb? What I got to do though in the sex inventory was really to get a look more at behavior, and as Malcolm said, possibly setting us up for amend down the road. And it was a very, very small part of my inventory. I mean, it in the fair inventory really didn't take a whole lot of time. And I find with most people that I work with, usually, you know, the resentment inventory seems to take up the most real estate as we go and do this. So that gets us to the end of the inventory section. What are we looking at for time here? We got 10 minutes. How about if we open it up and you guys have anything you want to talk about after listening to us, or share any experience? Start with Bob. Get a microphone here.
We're getting there. We're getting there. There you go, Robert. Step up in there.
I'm Bob, an alcoholic. I just remember in the beginning of the inventory it says nothing counts but thoroughness and honesty. And I had absolutely no familiarity with either thoroughness or honesty when I got here. And I realized that was going to be a difficult chore for me. I also had no relationship with a power greater than myself. And so this whole set of spiritual exercises are just that. They're exercises of the spirit. I'm going to be trying to develop a relationship with a power greater than myself. So on the top of each page of my inventory, I wrote, "Please God, help me to be thorough and honest," because it says nothing counts but thoroughness and honesty. So I got to deal with that. It served two purposes. Each time I got stuck, I would go up to the top of the page and read that, and I'd pray. That would be my prayer. Please God, help me be thorough and honest. And every time, I would either discover that I was done with that part, or I discovered that more would have to be done. It served two purposes. It helped me get me through the inventory. It also gave me, for the very first time in my life, a repetitive practice in prayer with the results that came right away. Because I would know if there was nothing to be done or if more needed to be done pretty much right away. So do that throughout the fourth step. This is a prayer and their action. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nancy, alcoholic.
Hi, Nancy.
It took me about 2.5 years to do the inventory. They laughed in the car when I said I had 300. If I knew you, I screwed with you. Thanks. And last night, the only person who was surprised when I did my turnarounds was really me with my behaviors, because everybody knew who I was and what I did, you know, with my self-seeking behavior and all that stuff. And, you know, when I came in last night, I said I wanted to rip some of the people's faces off at work because they were acting like they had. Well, it was me who had changed, you know. They were still being the same people, but when I work my program, I become different and can handle handle them. So it's me that had changed. Things were starting to get to me again. I was stressed. And when I started going into that behavior again, they were there ready for me to react to the old Nancy, which made me angry because, I care about people's opinions of me. It's always about, I care what you think of me. And in my head, it's like, but can't you see for the last 2 years I've been trying, and can't you give me this, all this trying to do the play, So anyways, the good news is I've decompressed, and I know when I go back Monday, they're going to be much better. It's costed me all this time for them to be much better, but, thank you. I have a place to come, and there's people that understand me. So thanks.
Hi, Michelle, alcoholic. Oh, boy. My first inventory was telling a boyfriend I met 2 weeks after my divorce. Met a man immediately in Alcoholics Anonymous. Didn't know about the don't change anything in the first year. Told him everything about my fourth step and didn't even write it. This is how sick I was. My second inventory was done again without a sponsor. And that one had to do with me. It was a biography. And I actually got a lot out of that one. I actually really cried a lot with that one. My third one was set up by Bob. And we were just starting to date. He set me up, but he said, you've got to go through someone else to talk to about your fifth step. So I am almost finished again now as we speak, my fifth step, with a real sponsor, real big book sponsor. And she asked me to see the last one I had done, and I showed her. And she said, boy, whoever set you up did it right. But on the fifth column, and I said, you know what? I had no idea. I was in a complete blackout with fifth step. Then I had complications with big book sponsor. I chose the wrong one. So in the middle of all this, I'm writing chemo brain. I can identify with what you were speaking about. And it was a nice day. I sat outside, and there was a little breeze, and I'm a very organized person. And that little breeze blew my inventory all over the yard. And I'm freaking out. I don't feel good, and I'm chasing them into trees and hanging on branches. And then I said, I just started crying, and I just said, now I have to organize this thing. And I couldn't. I just was a maniac. So I didn't have a sponsor to call because she left me. And I had asked a few people, including men, who said they can't because I was a woman. I finally asked somebody that I was sure was going to say no because she had too many other people. And she said, I never say no. And she has been the best thing that has happened to me with this fifth step. And I have been thorough and honest. And I know I've written way too much. Not 335, 135. I was never fearful of this step. I couldn't wait to do this step. I needed it out of me. I needed that promise. Do not regret the path, nor wish to shut the door on it, out of me. Because I didn't get that. And now I do. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tom. I'm an alcoholic. I told myself when I was going to do the work that the reason was that I wanted to be a better sponsor, and I wanted to get a better connection with God, and the truth was I was really banging my head with relationships. I got sober at the age of 33 after my third divorce, and I was 6.5 years sober, and I couldn't find anyone to be the fourth Mrs. Tom Wingate. And I couldn't understand why, because here I was sober and quite a catch, and and I couldn't understand, and it was obvious that I was a victim. And these women didn't understand me, and I would just rant and rave constantly to anyone that would listen. Poor me, poor me, poor me. And so when I did my inventory, I just saw how selfish I was. And it wasn't just about sex. I expected women to fix me. And if you couldn't fix me, I was going to move on to the next person. But it was always like a baton. I wasn't letting go of the previous one until I had my hand into the next one, because I did not want to be alone. And, I also was so full of fear of being alone that, that I stayed with people too long that I wasn't really interested in. And, I was so afraid of getting married, on the other hand, that I was, dating people that were inappropriate. So once I did this process, I started, instead of dating somebody for 6 months to a year, and I would realize in like 4 weeks that it wasn't working. And I started dating appropriate people, and I've been married again for 12 years, and it's really a miracle of doing this work, because I addressed the sex and I addressed the fear. Thanks.
Hi, Alicia, alcoholic addict. I've been through this process twice. The first time I actually was doing my fourth, my sponsor also had left me, and I was ready to do my fifth. Oh, that was the mic. And I had to find somebody to share it with, and I asked somebody in one of the meeting I belonged to, the Milford Eye Opener, if I could do the work and sit with her. She said no problem. When I did that, she looked at me and she's like, a lot of the stuff that you're telling me, I think you're probably going to need help other than AA. So I was like, okay. I thought I was going to get this big relief. I thought that it was just going to be so great. And, so I was a little discouraged after that. And it just felt like, I kept running into a wall. But the second time I did the work, I must say, like, the first time, I noticed the change starting, like, in me as a person, and how just everything. So I just started looking at things differently, and basically looking at myself more, because I never was the problem. Everybody else was, and it was never me. But once I started doing the work, I could actually see clearer. And, it's really good to refresh everything and go through this and be here. I need to do the steps again, and especially right now. I mean, when life gets hard and everything, it's just something that I need to do. I'm still writing every day, but, I just need to go through this process again. So, thanks.
My name is Cindy. I'm an alcoholic. There's